June 6, 1944. 04:58 a.m. The English Channel, black and restless beneath a moonless sky. The water slams hard against cold steel hulls, each wave rattling the teeth of the men packed inside. Diesel fumes hang thick in the air. Someone vomits, someone prays. No one speaks loudly. You can barely see the horizon, only darkness, broken occasionally by the orange pulse of distant naval guns. Each explosion rolls across the water seconds later, a low thunder that vibrates through boots and bones alike. Private First Class James O'Neill grips his rifle so tightly his knuckles have gone white. The weapon feels heavier than it ever did in training, not because it weighs more, but because in a few minutes it will decide whether he lives. The boat lurches. Spray crashes over the bow and soaks every man in front. The coxswain yells something, but the wind tears it away before it reaches the back. The engine growls at full throttle, straining forward like an animal forced toward fire. This craft, this awkward, boxy thing, was never meant to inspire confidence. It rides low, its sides are thin, its flat bottom slaps the waves instead of cutting through them. Compared to the sleek warships behind it, it looks almost ridiculous. A floating crate with an engine. And yet tonight, more than 4,000 of them are moving at once. Thousands of identical silhouettes spreading across the channel, all aimed at one stretch of occupied Europe. Ahead lies Normandy. Behind concrete bunkers and steel obstacles, German defenders wait, confident, prepared, certain of one thing above all. The Allies will never make it ashore in boats like these. Along the French coast, Oberleutnant Karl Weber peers through binoculars from his position above Omaha Beach. He has been awake since midnight, watching the sea, watching nothing. The Atlantic wall stretches behind him, pillboxes, trenches, machine gun nests, artillery casemates. Years of concrete, millions of tons of steel, a fortress designed to make invasion impossible. German engineers had studied every known Allied landing craft. They had measured drafts, calculated wave tolerance, estimated surf limits. Their conclusion was simple. The beaches of Normandy, especially Omaha, were too rough, too shallow, too unpredictable. Any small craft would either swamp, break apart, or stall long before reaching the sand. The enemy, they believed, would need proper ships. Large ships. And large ships could be destroyed. So when reports filtered in months earlier about an American boat made of plywood, with a flat bottom and a crude front ramp, German planners barely bothered to write it down. A joke. A peacetime toy. Certainly not a weapon of war. Weber lowers his binoculars and rubs his eyes. The horizon still looks empty. Then something changes. At first, it's just movement. A faint darkening of the waterline. He raises the binoculars again. And freezes. The sea is moving. Not waves. Shapes. Hundreds of them. Low squat advancing fast. Weber's stomach tightens. Boot, he mutters. Boats. Back on the water, the men inside O'Neill's craft feel the shift before they see it. The boat rises, then slams. Again. Again. Every impact sends a shock up through the spine. Water pours in from the sides, pooling around boots. The engine screams under strain. To the left and right, other boats surge forward, some disappearing into spray, others momentarily airborne as waves lift them and drop them like toys. A man shouts, "Jesus Christ!" Another laughs too loudly, too suddenly. Then the first German flares ignite overhead. The sky turns white. For a split second, everything is visible. The water, the boats, the men, and the beach. Barbed wire, wooden stakes, steel hedgehogs bristling from the sand. And beyond them, muzzle flashes. Machine guns open up. Tracers stitch across the water, skipping like burning stones. One boat to the right erupts in sparks as bullets tear through its hull. Men fall before they even understand they've been hit. O'Neill ducks instinctively, though there's nowhere to hide. The ramp in front of him rattles with incoming fire. This boat isn't armored. It was never meant to be. And yet it keeps going. Wave after wave crashes over the bow, and still the engine pushes forward. Closer, closer. In German bunkers, disbelief spreads. These boats aren't stopping. They aren't sinking. They aren't turning back. They're coming straight through the surf. What German engineers believed impossible is unfolding in front of their eyes. The flat bottoms that were mocked now skim over sandbars that would ground deeper vessels. The shallow draft lets them ride waves instead of being crushed by them. The crude ramps slam down where no ship could ever beach. Hundreds reach the shoreline. Then thousands. The defenders fire until barrels glow red, but they can't stop the flood. Because the invasion isn't arriving in one massive wave. It's arriving everywhere. At once. And the strangest part. The boats just keep coming. From the smoke and chaos, more shapes emerge, endless, relentless, mechanical in their repetition. Each one delivering men directly into hell. This was never supposed to work. Not like this. Not with those boats. And as the German defenders realize the scale of what's happening, one truth becomes terrifyingly clear. The weakest-looking machine in the Allied arsenal has just become the most dangerous. And the man who built it, a stubborn, unpolished American boat builder from New Orleans, is about to change the course of the war without ever setting foot on the beach. But that story began long before the guns opened fire. New Orleans, Louisiana. Late summer 1938. The air is thick with heat and river moisture, heavy enough to slow every movement. Along the Mississippi's edge, the clang of metal and the whine of saws echo through a modest boatyard that smells of oil, wet wood, and sweat. Andrew Jackson Higgins stands with his hands on his hips, staring at a prototype that most Navy officers would barely glance at. It isn't elegant. The hull is flat. The lines are blunt. The bow looks wrong, chopped short instead of tapering smoothly. It resembles a work barge more than a vessel of war. But Higgins isn't building something meant to impress admirals. He's building something meant to survive chaos. A foreman wipes his face and asks, "You really think this thing can run straight onto a beach?" Higgins doesn't hesitate. "Not onto it," he says. "Over it." He steps closer and kicks sand beneath the hull. "Swamps don't care about pretty designs," he continues. "They care about draft. You touch bottom too deep, you're dead." Higgins learned that lesson the hard way. Years earlier, his boats were used by oil companies navigating Louisiana's bayous. Waters so shallow, tangled, and unpredictable that traditional hulls simply failed. He'd watched expensive vessels bog down and rot, while his crude designs skimmed over mud flats like insects. Flat bottoms, shallow draft, power forward no matter what. When the U.S. Navy first visited his yard, they came out of curiosity, not respect. At the time, American amphibious doctrine barely existed. The last major landing operations dated back to World War I, and even those had been improvised disasters. Most naval planners believed any future invasion would require ports captured intact. Storming open beaches. Fantasy. So when Higgins demonstrated his boat, driving it straight at shore and beaching it hard, officers frowned. Then he tried to reverse. The boat didn't move. Higgins grinned. "Now imagine," he said, "you drop a ramp, men walk straight out." One officer reportedly muttered, "That's not how boats are built." Higgins shot back, "Then you're building the wrong boats." Early prototypes were dismissed almost immediately. Too rough, too simple, too civilian. Naval engineers criticized everything: the materials, the appearance, the lack of traditional naval structure. Some scoffed openly. One report described the craft as unsuitable for modern combat operations. Another called it a temporary utility vessel at best. What none of them understood was that Higgins wasn't solving a naval problem. He was solving a human problem. How do you get frightened men carrying heavy equipment through surf, under fire, and onto land in seconds? Not minutes. Seconds. Traditional boats forced soldiers to climb over the sides, often into chest-deep water. In training accidents alone, men drowned beneath the weight of their packs. Higgins watched one such exercise and walked away furious. He redesigned the bow. Then he cut it open. A ramp. Simple, brutal, effective. When it dropped, men didn't climb, they charged. It was a concept borrowed not from navies, but from barges and river craft. And that made traditionalists uncomfortable. The breakthrough came quietly. In 1940, the U.S. Marine Corps tested Higgins' craft during amphibious exercises. Observers watched as platoons exited faster than anything they'd ever seen before. Seconds shaved off landing times. Less confusion. Less panic. Still, resistance remained. Budgets were tight. War felt distant. Admirals preferred steel ships with pedigree, not wooden boats built by a man who swore constantly and refused to salute properly. Then France fell. Suddenly, every assumption collapsed. Europe was gone. Britain stood alone. And the United States realized that if it ever returned to the continent, it would not arrive through a friendly harbor. It would arrive through fire. Over beaches defended by machine guns. Through surf and obstacles and mines. And the Navy had nothing capable of doing that at scale. Nothing except the boat no one liked. In 1941, the Navy finally placed a serious order. Then doubled it. Then tripled it. Higgins' small yard exploded into motion. Workers poured in from across Louisiana: carpenters, welders, fishermen, men who had never seen a uniform in their lives. The production lines ran day and night. By 1943, Higgins Industries employed over 20,000 workers, including thousands of women and African Americans, working side by side in a segregated South that wartime necessity quietly overruled. They built boats faster than anyone thought possible. Each one looked the same. Each one felt disposable. But Higgins knew something the generals didn't yet fully grasp. Wars aren't won by perfect machines. They're won by machines you can afford to lose and replace by the thousands. Across the Atlantic, German intelligence took note of the rising numbers. But they misread the meaning. Reports spoke of small landing craft, lightly constructed, insufficient for heavy seas. Analysts concluded the Allies were bluffing. No serious invasion would rely on something so fragile. And if it did, the ocean would finish the job before German guns ever had to. By 1944, that belief hardened into doctrine. Concrete rose along the coast. Guns were emplaced. Obstacles planted at low tide. Because when the invasion came, the Germans were certain of one thing: the sea itself would be their greatest ally. They had no idea the sea had already chosen sides. And in a matter of months, those cheap toys would be hitting the beaches not in dozens, but in waves so dense the horizon itself would disappear. Normandy coast, early 1944. Concrete dust hangs in the air as German engineers finish another bunker overlooking the channel. The walls are nearly 2 meters thick. Steel reinforcement snakes through the poured slabs like bones. Inside, Machine guns are positioned with mathematical precision, overlapping arcs of fire designed to turn the beach below into a killing ground. This is the Atlantic Wall, Hitler's shield. From Norway to the Bay of Biscay, it stretches for thousands of kilometers, swallowing men, materials, and time. Propaganda posters call it impenetrable. German newsreels show confident officers inspecting fortifications, boots echoing on concrete floors. But beneath the bravado lies a quieter truth. They don't need perfection. They just need delay. German defensive doctrine along the coast rests on one core assumption. An invasion cannot move fast. Landing troops takes time. Unloading equipment takes time. Sorting units under fire takes time. If the defenders can hold the beaches for just a few hours, armored reserves can arrive and throw the invaders back into the sea. Everything depends on those first moments. And everything depends on how the enemy reaches shore. Which is why German planners studied Allied landing craft so carefully. They calculated wave heights, tidal patterns, beach gradients. The beaches of Normandy, particularly Omaha, were considered naturally hostile. The surf was unpredictable. Sandbars lay hidden beneath shallow water. Sudden drops could swallow vehicles whole. Small boats, they believed, would founder. Large ships would be forced to stand off. Either way, the invasion would slow, and slowing meant death. So obstacles were placed where they thought boats would stall. Wooden stakes angled toward the sea, tipped with mines. Steel hedgehogs planted to rip open hulls. Belgian gates positioned to catch vessels at mid-tide. Every trap assumed one thing: a deeper draft, a boat that needed water beneath it. No one imagined a craft that could skim over sand, slam itself onto shore, and simply open its mouth. On paper, the German plan made sense. On paper, the Higgins Boat barely existed. Intelligence summaries referred to them as auxiliary landing craft. Light construction, minimal armor, short operational lifespan. In other words, expendable. German analysts assumed the Allies would use them sparingly, perhaps for reconnaissance or diversion, not as the backbone of an invasion. When reconnaissance photographs revealed mass production in Britain, many dismissed it as deception. No serious military would gamble Europe on something so fragile. Even Rommel, tasked with reinforcing the coast, believed the greatest danger lay in airborne landings and armored breakthroughs, not small boats. He focused on mines, artillery, anti-tank guns. The sea, he believed, would do the rest. At dawn on June 6th, that belief begins to crumble. As the first Higgins boat surged toward shore, German gunners opened fire immediately. And at first, the results seem reassuring. Boats explode. Men fall. The water darkens. But then something strange happens. The firing doesn't thin the numbers. It doesn't slow the advance. Every destroyed craft is replaced instantly by another pushing through the smoke behind it. The defenders aren't facing a wave. They're facing a conveyor belt. The flat-bottomed boats ride over submerged obstacles that were meant to tear keels apart. Some strike mines, but others pass cleanly between them, drifting in water so shallow that mines simply sit useless beneath their hulls. When boats do run aground early, they don't sink. They sit and keep moving forward. Engines screaming, propellers chewing sand. Then the ramps drop, and men pour out. Not climbing, not hesitating, running. The very thing German planners feared, rapid disembarkation, is happening in seconds. Each boat becomes a brief door into chaos. Open, empty, gone. Another replaces it immediately. The defenders fire until barrels overheat. Machine gun crews swap weapons. Runners sprint for more ammunition. Still the boats come. At Omaha Beach, the situation becomes surreal. Units meant to be destroyed in the water are reaching the shingle intact. Entire platoons appear where none were expected. German officers struggle to understand how so many men are arriving so quickly. They radio inland for armor support. The response is delayed. Orders must pass through command layers. Permissions must be granted. Hitler himself has restricted the release of panzer divisions. The window the Atlantic Wall was designed to hold, those critical early hours, is slipping away. Because the sea has not slowed the invasion. It has delivered it. By mid-morning, beaches that were expected to remain contested until afternoon are already crowded with wounded, reinforcements, and equipment. Not because the Allies have won yet, but because they have survived long enough to continue landing. And survival on D-Day is everything. Far from the fighting, in England, production officers listen to radio reports filtering back from Normandy. They hear about heavy casualties, about chaos, about beaches soaked in blood. But they also hear something else. Landings ongoing, craft continuing operations, resupply proceeding. The Higgins boats are still running, still shuttling men forward, still turning back for more. Many will never return. Some are riddled with holes. Others limp home on damaged engines. But enough survive. Enough always survive. And that is the difference between failure and foothold. German commanders begin to realize what has gone wrong. They didn't underestimate Allied courage. They underestimated Allied logistics. They dismissed the machine that made courage usable. By noon, the impossible is undeniable. The Allies are ashore, not because the defenses failed, but because something simpler overcame them. A boxy little boat, built not to be admired, built to be used. And as smoke rolls inland and the first vehicles begin crawling onto French soil, one question spreads quietly through German headquarters. If the boats could do this, what else have we underestimated? The beach never really quiets. Even hours after the first landings, the sound is constant. Artillery cracking inland, naval guns hammering the horizon, wounded men shouting for medics. Smoke drifts low, clinging to the sand as if the earth itself is trying to hide what's happening. Yet through all of it, the boats keep moving. Out of the haze they appear again and again. Higgins boats nosing toward shore, ramps scarred, hulls dented, engines coughing but alive. Some arrive half full. Some arrive with no officers left standing. Some arrive carrying nothing but ammunition and blood-soaked stretchers. They come anyway, because now the invasion isn't about bravery. It's about momentum. And momentum is something the Germans cannot stop once it begins. By mid-morning, Allied planners face a nightmare. The initial assault has succeeded barely, but success brings its own danger. Men are piling up on narrow strips of sand, supplies lag behind, heavy weapons are still offshore. If reinforcements don't arrive fast enough, German counterattacks could still drive everything back into the sea. This is where invasions usually die. Not in the first charge, but in the hours after. The Higgins boats become the thin line between foothold and catastrophe. They ferry mortars. They haul radio equipment. They drag wounded back through surf, still laced with bullets. When larger landing ships hesitate to approach shallow water, the Higgins boats don't wait. They run in. Again. And again. And again. Each trip takes minutes. Each trip matters. On Omaha, officers begin using the boats as mobile lifelines. Small units reorganize around where craft land, not where plans said they should be. Maps become useless. The boats define the battlefield now. German observers notice something deeply unsettling. The invasion is not slowing. In theory, the chaos on the beaches should paralyze the attackers. In reality, the chaos is being fed. The faster men fall, the faster replacements arrive. It feels endless. German gunners begin to experience a creeping exhaustion, not physical but psychological. They destroy a boat. Another replaces it. They mow down a squad. Another steps into its place moments later. No pause. No breathing space. No silence. The Atlantic Wall was built to shatter a single massive wave. But it was never designed to withstand constant pressure. The Higgins boats don't attack in a dramatic surge. They grind. They erode. They turn static defenses into liabilities. Every minute the Germans hold position is another minute Allied numbers increase behind the smoke. Time, once Germany's ally, has betrayed them. By afternoon, something extraordinary begins to happen. American engineers start clearing exits off the beach. Bulldozers crawl ashore. Artillery pieces are dragged through sand that should have swallowed them. None of this should be possible yet. According to German estimates, this phase was expected days later, assuming the beaches were even taken at all. But the small boats have rewritten the timetable. They didn't just deliver soldiers. They delivered tempo. And tempo is power. Somewhere offshore, a damaged Higgins boat limps back toward its transport ship. Its ramp is bent. One side is riddled with holes. The coxswain refuses to abandon it. He knows something no manual ever wrote down. As long as his engine runs, the invasion breathes. That understanding spreads across the fleet. Crews patch hulls with scrap metal. They reroute fuel lines. They bail water with helmets. No one waits for orders. They've all seen what happens when the boats stop. That evening, as darkness approaches, German commanders send increasingly desperate reports inland. They speak of unexpected landing efficiency, of continuous reinforcement, of failure of coastal assumptions. These are careful words, but behind them lies panic. Because the truth is simpler and far more terrifying. The Allies have solved the problem of getting ashore. And once that problem is solved, everything else becomes a matter of time. By nightfall, more than 150,000 Allied troops are on French soil. Not delivered by battleships. Not carried by grand vessels of steel. But by thousands of identical craft that look too small to matter. The invasion has succeeded, not yet in victory but in survival. And survival is the hardest part. Far away in New Orleans, Andrew Higgins listens to radio updates with a clenched jaw. He doesn't cheer. He doesn't smile. He only asks one question again and again. Are the boats still running? Because he understands something few generals ever fully grasp. Weapons don't win wars. Systems do. And his system, crude, ugly, unglamorous, has just carried an army across the most defended shoreline on Earth. But the cost is not yet known. The beaches are still killing men. The Germans are regrouping inland. And now that the Allies have landed, a far greater test awaits. Holding ground against a continent still under enemy control. As night falls over Normandy, the Higgins boats turn once more toward the shore. Not for glory, not for headlines, but because tomorrow the war must move inland. And without them, it cannot move at all. June 7, 1944. Normandy, France. The morning light reveals what the smoke of D-Day had hidden. The beaches are unrecognizable. Wrecked boats lie scattered like bones along the tide line, split hulls, twisted ramps, engines half buried in sand. Some still bear hand-painted numbers. Others are burned so black their shape is barely visible. But behind them, beyond the beach exits carved through bluffs and minefields, Allied vehicles are moving inland. Slowly, painfully, but moving. This is the moment German commanders feared most. Not the landing, the permanence. Because an invasion that survives the night becomes something else entirely. It becomes a front. German reports flow up the chain of command with increasing urgency. Panzer divisions request permission to counterattack in force. Field commanders argue that if they strike now, before the Allies fully organize, the beachhead might still be crushed. But the delay, the fatal delay, has already occurred. By the time approvals come, the Allied footprint is too wide, too deep, too alive. And the reason is visible everywhere. Those same awkward boats are still running. Despite exhaustion, despite losses, despite damage, they shuttle fuel. They bring engineers. They evacuate wounded. They allow the invasion to function like a living organism, breathing in reinforcements, breathing out casualties. German doctrine had never accounted for that. They imagined landings as a single violent moment. What they face instead is a process, one that doesn't stop. In the days that follow, Allied planners begin to fully grasp what has happened. The Higgins Boat is no longer just a landing craft. It is a strategic breakthrough. It has solved the problem that haunted military thinkers for centuries. How do you project massive ground force power across open water without a port? The answer, it turns out, is not elegance. It's repetition, speed, and simplicity. More than 20,000 Higgins boats will be built during the war. They will land troops in Sicily, in Italy, in southern France, across the Pacific at Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima. Everywhere the Allies fight, the same shape appears on the horizon. The same blunt bow, the same rattling engine, the same ramp crashing down. Different beaches, same result. Even enemy commanders take notice. Captured German officers later admit their mistake. They prepared for ships. They prepared for guns. They prepared for heroics. They did not prepare for manufacturing. They did not prepare for scale. The Higgins boat wasn't terrifying because it was powerful. It was terrifying because it was replaceable. Lose one, another arrives. Lose 10, 100 more wait offshore. In war, inevitability is more frightening than force. After the war, General Dwight D. Eisenhower reflects on the invasion. He does not speak first of tanks, or bombers, or battleships. He speaks of logistics. And he names 3 weapons without which victory in Europe would have been impossible. One of them is the Higgins boat. Not a general, not a division. A boat. Andrew Higgins, the man who built it, never sought ceremony. He died in 1952, far from any battlefield. No parades followed him. No monuments marked his passing at the time. But every modern amphibious operation, every doctrine, every landing craft, every beach assault plan since, traces its lineage back to his stubborn refusal to build boats the proper way. On the Normandy beaches today, the tide still comes in and out. The surf still crashes. Tourists walk where soldiers once ran. And scattered among the museums and memorials is a quiet truth. The invasion of Europe did not begin with a grand warship. It began with a simple ramp slamming down into sand, with frightened men stepping forward, with a machine that everyone said would fail. Until it didn't. Until it worked. Until it changed everything.